Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this learning experience brought to you by Harness. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into things today, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes for you. First off, we are recording our session today. So if you miss any of our conversation, if you'd like to watch again later, or if you'd like to share with the rest of your team, we'll be sure to send you the recording via email here as soon as we close out our live recording today. Now, if you'd like to get involved, there are a couple of ways to do so. Your first option is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. And when you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you're joining from today. I see we already have 4 continents represented, so let's see if we can get a few more. Now, if you have specific questions, we do want you to direct those to that Q&A tab on the right side of the chat section. We'll be handling a lot of questions throughout our program today, so be sure to send them into that Q&A section, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can. Now, if you jump to the handout section, you'll see there are a couple of resources there for you, so feel free to grab those. And before we close things out today, after we close things out today, I will be selecting 2 of our most engaged attendees to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So ways to become eligible for this giveaway are to participate in our chat, submit your questions, and you can also fill out our post-webinar survey. More details on that at the end of our webinar today. So our topic is GitOps, OpenTofu, and the new world of infrastructure as code management. I'm joined today by Martin Reynolds, Field CTO at Harness, and we're also joined by Roger Sims, Principal Software Engineer at Harness. So Martin and Roger, thank you both so much for joining us today. Martin, would you like to take it over from here?
Sure. Thank you very much, Cody. Very much appreciated. So welcome, everybody. As I said, I'm Martin Reynolds, and I'm the Field CTO at Harness. I have with me Roger. Roger, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Roger, as already said, Principal Engineer at Harness, working with our IaCM module, Infrastructure as Code Management. And also one of the steering committee for OpenTofu.
Awesome. Thank you very much indeed. So we've got a couple of things I really wanted to, talk about today. They're all in the title, so there should be no surprises. But why don't we kind of make a start with kind of where the world of GitOps is, and what's kind of current with GitOps at the moment. Roger?
Sorry, say again. Apologies.
That's okay, no problem at all. So I was kind of asking what the current state of GitOps is at the moment, and kind of how you feel that's sitting in relation to everything else with infrastructure as code.
I think we're seeing a bit of an increase in the general GitOps space. It's been used, obviously, a lot recently for the service space for quite some time, and a lot of tooling there with Kubernetes, for example. I think one of the biggest things recently, the upsets recently, has been the company behind Flux, which I'm now forgetting the name of, has unfortunately gone under. So there's a little bit of within that space, maybe a little bit of uncertainty about how that kind of competitor goes forward. Hopefully it stays on as an open source project and continues to gain momentum. But that's kind of one of the big kind of things. More specifically with the infrastructure as code kind of side of things, we're definitely seeing an uptick in the more Git led approach to this, with a number of companies spinning up over the last few years to kind of take that approach and rival the likes of Terraform Cloud or Terraform Enterprise.
Yeah, and so I know you work with a lot of different size companies, but also specifically regulated companies. And what are some of the kind of challenges that people often face when they go down that GitOps path?
That's a good question. There's definitely a lot of things around. It's always great to say that you want to automate the world and make everything automated. But the reality of that is we also need to kind of build in a lot of checks and balances to those automations. And we're seeing that more and more. Within our own module, for example, we're going down the full automation route that we will show some sort of demo of later. But very quickly, we were getting feedback from customers that they still needed a little bit of a break glass or a human intervention before making those big changes. I guess whenever you're talking about infrastructure rather than services, there could be a bigger impact, especially around things like cost being a big impact. And maybe the fear is, we've all seen the headlines of various different companies who've accidentally kept some automation going and all of a sudden running into the tens of thousands of dollars spun up for no particularly good reason. So we're seeing those sorts of additional checks and balances needing to be part of that Git world.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm kind of I really want to start talking about OpenTofu, and I know you're there, but I know I've posted about it multiple times. I'm very excited about that. But so before we talk about how OpenTofu fits into kind of GitOps and infrastructure as code management, do you want to give us the introduction of what OpenTofu is? Let's start with that, and then I'll follow on with some other questions around OpenTofu.
At a very, very high level, I guess the easiest way to understand OpenTofu is in the context of how it came to be. Terraform, I think was undoubtedly the if not the forerunner, definitely the de facto tool that people made use of within that infrastructure as code space. Kind of followed on very, very much from that kind of configuration management and kind of took that forward. Was broad enough that could be used across multiple clouds, wasn't specific like CloudFormation, and really was really innovative in how it kind of set things up, and ultimately was extensible enough that could be used across the board, not just with infrastructure, but with multiple other anything that you could be considered a resource. Taking Harness, for example, we have a way to configure Harness and the resources that are within Harness, your users, your entities, whatever they may be, set that all up with Terraform and the various automations that's in place. I'm being told something about Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to just make sure you're keeping focused on the mic?
Yeah. Apologies. If it continues, I'll switch to the standard mic. So that's kind of the context of the background to OpenTofu, and it was a huge open source, initially big open source kind of driver, a lot of contributions. Unfortunately, as HashiCorp kind of moved a little bit more commercially minded, as all commercial organizations need to, they need to pay the bills like everyone else. We saw a little bit of a tail off in the open source thing. Side of things, the community itself felt a little bit disgruntled in places where some features weren't being implemented because it might, they were seen to possibly be harming HashiCorp's commercial offerings. So there was a little bit of skepticism around the future, and ultimately, when the license change happened last summer, it kind of like put a bit of a death nail to the overall community feel on where Terraform was headed. The open source community that was vast, and that kind of the ecosystem that was created as a result. There's a lot within that. A lot of active participants within that ecosystem felt like they were unsure of what the future held and how well to continue within that ecosystem, and whether or not it was worth spending your time in. So off the back of that, I guess a lot of who could be considered competitors got together and asked initially for HashiCorp to revert the license back to the prior license, more open source. Obviously didn't happen, and as a result, the project was forked and then kind of taken on as an open source project. Since that time, we've released OpenTofu. It's currently sitting at 1.6.2 with the 1.7 release imminent. 1.6 is a drop-in replacement for Terraform, and there's been a big effort for the features that were released in 1.6 that we replicated those with our own approach. And the 1.7 release will diverge a little bit by bringing in some more of the community features that have been asked for some time. But the bringing in some new features that the community have been looking for. In terms of where the project is sitting, we had great support initially from people kind of getting behind the project, saying they'll want to be involved, but also kind of in real terms, a lot of these competing companies have come together to offer staff and time and real contributions behind that. We now have a core team of full-time engineers working on this, similar to anything else, spending their time reviewing PRs and writing new code and new features. So all in all, I think it's going pretty well. It's gaining traction. We're part of the Linux Foundation and edging towards CNCF approval, with the ultimate aim to that no one of these kind of commercial entities that are kind of really backing it at the minute can kind of take control, and it will stay an open source project for its lifetime.
Awesome. And I did miss some of that because apparently I dropped, which proves how live we are. But the one thing so we're at version 1 now, right? Version 1 is launched and live. It's a full, we've gone through that kind of iteration. So we're fully at version 1 that launched. And, from that version 1, and I know you were just talking about the investment and the full-time engineers from multiple companies, what's coming post version 1? Are we staying, is OpenTofu staying compatible with Terraform? For how long? So I'm rifling questions at you, but that I think there was a couple there. So a little bit of what next. How long is OpenTofu going to stay compatible? And go for it. Sorry.
Sure. I should say the steering committee meet pretty much weekly at this current time, and almost every session has something around how long will we stay compatible. The answer to that is probably as long as we need to. We would like to be a drop-in replacement for as long as we can. Primarily because infrastructure takes time to move. No business is going to just up and shift its main tooling overnight. So we understand there's a long tail of people wanting to switch, and so we'll be as compatible as we can be for as long as we can be. That being said, we're starting to see some divergence already. So the 1.7 release, which will be the next one sometime within this month, is the plan. We'll see a brand new feature coming to OpenTofu, which is not available within Terraform, it's a big kind of feature that's been asked for, requested for quite a long time within Terraform. And a couple of the folk who are contributors and community who are trying to put together a good RFC, which has then been taken and being worked on, and that's client-side encryption. So the ability for your state file to be encrypted anytime that it's at rest, and that'll be a pretty big departure from Terraform. And one of the big things that we've been talking about recently then at the steering committee and the kind of strategic side of things is then how do we take that forward, because that's going to require some changes that will break Terraform if people want to move back from Tofu to Terraform. So how do we do that in a way that is good for everybody? We understand that some people will take this, play with it, but ultimately maybe need to go back to Terraform for whatever reasons. And we want to make sure that we're playing well with all of our users and the full community. So yes, there's a little bit of divergence coming pretty imminently, but it's not quite there yet. For anyone who wants to know more about that, the RSC is in the issue backlog of the repo. We've tried to do everything out and open. Those strategy meetings, the notes are all posted there in the repo as well. So we there's a few other kind of minor things that are coming as well, but they're kind of more of a minor note that might change things slightly from how Terraform typically runs. Sideways compatibility, we'll take that on as it needs to. Every new release of Terraform, the new features are reviewed, and we kind of figure out what we want to take forward, what fits with the Tofu vision, and what doesn't make sense. So that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but it is where
I don't think that was a wishy-washy answer. I think that was fairly clear. So, you know, you're maintaining it because you want to be a good citizen. You know, OpenTofu wants to be a good citizen. You're also bringing new, and I know from personal experience, long requested features into the product, and you're trying to do that in a way that allows portability between OpenTofu and other frameworks, including Terraform. I'm summarizing, but I'm pretty sure that's what you said. If you can give me a yes or a no, awesome. Yeah,
that sounds good.
That's awesome. So I guess I had, well, actually, before I ask that question, the one thing on OpenTofu, I think we will make sure we add some of the OpenTofu links into the handout section, so people can get access to that directly after the talk. So I guess we've kind of covered what the future holds, and it sounds to me like the future for OpenTofu is going to be very much community driven in terms of, you know, making sure that it's there. And I love the kind of move towards the CNCF, which is fabulous. It's also kind of exciting to hear about, you know, competing companies working together for community benefits. I think that's also fabulous. So I guess, you know, we've talked a little bit about GitOps. We've talked a little bit about OpenTofu, which again, I'm still super excited about. And then I guess to the final bit, how do we put all those things kind of together? And what is it, you know, what's your vision, our vision around, you know, how we can do really good management of infrastructure as code, and how we can do that in a well-governed way that has some of those things that you mentioned earlier, like the break glass that can work with Terraform or work with OpenTofu or another, you know, so, you know, what's the plan? What's the process? What are we doing with those kind of things?
Sure. That's my cue to talk about what else I've been working on. So yes, within so Harness, being the DevOps platform, aims to, you know, increase, you know, team velocity and kind of take a lot of the boring stuff out of the way for people, and make sure that we can automate as much as possible, but in a safe and controlled way. Having, you know, worked with teams and I kind of cross medium to large size enterprises before, I fully understood that kind of challenge of, you know, one team wants to do it one way, another team wants to do it another. You buy in another company, and they've got a completely set of different procedures. And you need a system that's kind of flexible to work with all of that. As I said, within the GitOps kind of side of things, applications are one thing, but infrastructure is different. Like, infrastructure is just state everywhere, and it's much more difficult to kind of move with, to get right, and also to make changes as well, all within a kind of cost-effective way. You'll find specialists within the organization, your DevOps team, your SRE team, your ops team, whatever label you put on it. But you want to shift as much control down to the team, the actual build team as possible. And we've seen a lot of movement within the industry around shifting left on this. And while that's been great, it's also come with its own challenges around, well, how do you move that expertise from those specialists and get that into the teams who are maybe, you know, writing the product and understand how the product needs to work, and marrying those things up. So having seen that opportunity, Harness jumped on that to try and apply their knowledge of CD and CI and all the various other kind of bits that they've been working on for years, and applying that to infrastructure. And again, I think coming straight back from a lot of our customers about like the pain points that they've had over the years. So with that in mind, I guess we've built out. We're just in process of finishing up releasing our new module, infrastructure as code management. So and that's what it tries to bring together.
And I mean, I did want to dig into the shifting build that left and how do we make sure that skill sets shift left, but I feel like that's a whole other webinar in its own right. However, we do like to do that right. And the thing that I'm most excited about is that you're going to show us, right? You're going to show us how we do infrastructure as code management.
I've got a very basic demo to kind of get to eventually, but yeah, there's a lot in there. I guess there's a lot of tooling that you can definitely stitch together yourself, and I think that DevOps space is kind of known for using this tool for that and this tool for the other, and you're bringing it all together. And the great thing around what we're trying to build is building on top of that initial platform that means you don't necessarily need a lot of the repetition. Or a lot of the homegrown solutions. Still enough flexibility that you can still do that. But yes, I definitely have a bit of a demo just to kind of show off some of the capabilities that we're building in, so that shift left approach and that kind of automated approach can be done with safety in mind and at the forefront.
I was going to ask before we jumped into the demo, how are we addressing things like governance and auditability and security? Because, we know for almost every industry these days, there is some level of regulation and, requirement to ensure that everything is well governed and we know what happened when. And I think in some ways it's more critical with infrastructure as code, right? Because this is, it fundamentally can affect multiple software stacks depending on how your organization is set up.
Yeah, the impact could be big. I guess we cover this in a bunch of different ways. From the ground up, the whole system's kind of covered by RBAC and good kind of user controls around like who can actually do fine-grained approaches to who can do what. So at a very clear outset, in the same way that you kind of divvy up your infrastructure at the AWS or Azure level, you can then do that within Harness itself as well, to kind of say you get responsibility for this chunk and you get responsibility for that chunk and nothing else. But on top of that, I guess it's also bringing in some of those, again, much more fine-grained around like what are the actual changes. So things like OPA and being able to apply policies to the changes that are proposed.
Just before we go on, in case anyone doesn't know, OPA is the Open Policy Agent. Sorry, I just thought I was joking. I think we sometimes talk about these things and we forget that.
Yes, I'm always being told off for acronyms. The Open Policy Agent is a way to define policies with a language called Rego, and you can work that over pretty much any well-defined format. So typically JSON. So if there's a well-defined JSON, you can pass it into the OPA agent. You have a defined policy for that, and you will get some sort of pass-fail warn response out of that agent to give you an indication of if it's good or not, or needs maybe some further looking at. So we've built that. We've always had that in mind from the get-go on this model to make sure that it gets built in. Again, it's an open source project. It's part of the CNCF. We aren't building that ourselves. We're just making use of the amazing open source tools that are available for us.
Yeah, I have one last thing on the, because I know we've been differing in a few things, but, one of the things, and, some of this comes from my history of being responsible for the cloud costs, is that something we're looking to address as well? Is that something, I know when I was running infrastructure and engineering teams, one of the things I always wanted to be able to do was know how much a cost was going to cost me before I deployed it. You can always make estimates, right? But actually knowing, at a kind of more detailed level and maybe being able to wrap some of that policy around it was kind of like that was always a dream that I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, I think traditionally that space has been dominated by companies who will look at your bill and look at your current landscape and kind of be able to say, oh, you could cut some cost by doing that, shave something off over there, and Harness has one of those modules itself. But sometimes that is a bit after the fact, and you want something a bit more upfront. If you, again, you're maybe a product build team kind of member, you maybe don't have the insight to think that, just changing something to, large to an extra large is going to cost whatever it costs, or thinking about like how that works underneath the hood, because it's not something you've had to worry about before. You've maybe just been writing code. So what we're trying to do is bring that forward, and again, making use of another open source tool, InfraCost, behind the scenes, that every change that's being proposed can run through that. So you get very clear and center, here's the costs that are being, additional costs or savings that are being made by making this change. And in a fairly fast kind of process of like even just through PRs, you can kind of start to get feedback on what that looks like. Now, building that then on top of the other kind of controls that we have in place, you could definitely start to build up a system which is, oh, it looks like your costs are going to triple with this change. Let's reject that, and maybe that needs to go to management for some approval or something. But that's kind of left to the user then to start to define like what their actual policies are. But information is key, and we're trying to give the customers much information with the tooling that we have for them then to build the correct system that they're looking for.
That's awesome. So I feel like we've had quite a lot of talking. And I know I'm asking you to talk some more, but it would be really great if you could show us some of that. I think you've done the demo linked with OpenTofu this time, did you? Or did you do it with Terraform? I can't remember which one you said you were doing.
Oh no, figured Tofu is the way forward for us in this module.
Yeah.
So that was definitely what we're kind of aiming to get to. So
okay. So yeah, if you're ready to go, then let's go. And then I noticed there's a few questions, but I think we'll pick them all up at the end with the demo and run through those questions.
Sure. Let me just. Okay, screen available for folks?
Yes,
yep.
I can see that.
Okay, so we're just going to drop straight in. So we've talked a little bit about some of the theory behind, and this infrastructure as code management is trying to bring together, those controls and that configurability and kind of the bringing expected results. So we kind of aren't making any oopsies, and everything's kind of managed in a single place. Within our infrastructure as code module, our core entity is a workspace. You're kind of looking at some of the configuration of that currently. I should say maybe before I jump on that, as I said initially, this is still pre-GA, so there's a few little glitches still being ironed out. So you might see some visual things or some other things. The demo was running fine earlier on today when I was kind of rehearsing, but you never know. We always have to pray to the demo gods. But with that caveat out of the way, we're sitting here in our core entity, the workspace, which is very analogous to a Terraform cloud workspace in that it brings together the actual configuration code, so your Tofu or your Terraform code, and also then incorporates the sorry, 1 second. Incorporates the input variables that you might have for that. And then finally, the actual running state, because infrastructure is all running state somewhere. And to that end, I guess your workspace is a state file in a kind of Terraform or Tofu speak. So if you run the same code, but in slightly different environments, then you'll see multiple, you say you're running in 3 different environments, you'll need 3 different workspaces to kind of keep on top of that. So jumping into this kind of configuration, give you a quick kind of overview of how we would set up a very simple workspace and a very simple demo of how you might manage it. This configuration, given a very imaginative name of demo, it's some AWS, so I want to enable the costs here. This isn't always applicable. As I said earlier, Harness is a way to manage your Harness install setup with Terraform or Tofu, and you wouldn't necessarily need a cost estimation at that point. So not all resources are something that you might cost. Next thing kind of that you're going to need is some sort of provisioner, and also what you're trying to provision. Harness has a concept of a connector, which is any way to run from the environment that you're executing the commands on or the tasks on to the outside world, any sort of third party. I have a AWS connector set up here. That has a whole bunch of different security options within it. One of the joys of Harness is that it's configurable across the board. Everything from just dropping in your access key and secret key to kind of rule assumption within with your own Kubernetes setup, for example, and some sort of hybrid setup. And then finally, Tofu and Terraform are some of the options we support at the moment. We have plans to bring in all of the major infrastructure as code tooling out there. But with Terraform having the major market share when we first started this module, that was the place to start. Tofu being a drop-in replacement, it's very straightforward to get moving with. And then last and not least, if some of what we're trying to do here is ensure reliability and auditability, we require some sort of SCM solution. So in this case, I've got a GitHub code set up that we can link out to. And that again brings in the process of ensuring that nobody's just running random code on their local machine that they've edited without any accountability. And so we're bringing in that kind of approach to making sure everything is checked and balanced before we move forward. As a quick kind of look to the rest of the demo, just going to give you a quick overview of the silly Terraform that has been set up here. Definitely not production grade, but enough to get us going with a demo. So this is the repo that we're going to be connecting to in a little bit. We'll come back to that in a second. Looking across the rest of this workspace space, there's a few other kind of bits around the configurability. We do have the option then to drop in some environment variables to where the Tofu code is being run. So you might have a need to kind of drop in various different kind of environment specific information. And then also at a workspace level, a way to ensure various different variables for this workspace. And those just get passed in as typical TFRs to the command. I was saying that we aim for complete control over your stack with the SCM integration. But we do still allow full access to your state file via CLI, and this is a standard Terraform backend. This is completely wrapped in separate RBAC controls to a lot of the rest of what's going on. We've got very fine-grained RBAC on this, so you can imagine in the case of needing to do some sort of upgrade or migration, you often need to drop into the CLI tool and do some sort of funky stuff with state. And this would be a way that you can still do that without necessarily you power users could potentially get access to, but your typical kind of run-of-the-mill engineers running some changes wouldn't be able to touch this. So that's kind of the configuration side of things. On the other side, we've talked a lot about kind of keeping track of things, keeping an understanding of what's going on. So we keep a track of every state file that's kind of been uploaded against this workspace, so you can kind of keep checks and balances by way of an audit trail. Also, the executions that are being applied against this workspace, so all the various different control executions that have happened from within Harness. And then finally, an overview of what's going on and what this is actually managing. So those who are quick to look at the Terraform will see that this is running two very simple instances, an S3 bucket and an EC2 instance. So that's the overall configurability and some of the feedback that you're getting. There is some reporting currently in the works to get a bit broader picture across kind of a project or an organization of what's going on. But this is just kind of kept to the local workspace level, which is all good. But we need to do some work here as well if we're going to bring in a lot of those controls. And that's where we bring our pipeline system. I have a very simple one sitting over here, which we'll kind of just quickly talk to. Anyone who has worked in any CI/CD system before will recognize something like this, where you can add in multiple different stages and kind of get to work. And this Harness is no different here. Most people will have something like a custom stage, but we also build in some tight integrations with our modules to give a bit of a better user experience. So that's what I've done with this one. This is part of our infrastructure as code module. So we drop in, and we instantly are kind of hit with some of the fine-grained controls that you can use. We have a fully managed cloud system where we will run a VM for you in the cloud, an ephemeral VM, I should say, security by standard, by default. So that VM will run the execution and then be destroyed afterwards. And any sensitive information that was held on that VM is blown away with that. However, if you want to get even further into the fine-grained controls, you can definitely run your own Kubernetes or local Docker setup and get into all sorts of fun with how that's set up in a hybrid sense, where Harness will have your control plane, but you run the execution plane within your own environment. Set this type integration then means that all you need to do is drop in the workspace you want to run against. I've hard-coded it here just for the sake of a demo, but that's customizable as well with runtime inputs. So you can kind of set up a single pipeline, which could be running against multiple different infrastructures, depending on the input that you're pushing in to begin with. And then finally, the embarrassingly silly, small execution that's actually going to happen. These are just plug-in steps. We initially have to initialize Tofu, bring down all the dependencies, and then obviously we're just going to do a plan. This is like a PR demo at the minute that we're just going to kind of quickly run through. This is a plugin system, so we can drop in almost anything here. It's similar to how Drone works, where you can bring in kind of Docker containers, and you can bring in any of those to this system. So you run things like tsec in a Docker container, or any kind of run commands that you want to, shell scripts you want to run, all perfectly fine. Similarly, we also support GitHub Actions. So if you have a bunch of GitHub Actions or popular repos out there, you can definitely pull these in as well and kind of work to your heart's content. There's a bunch of advanced options and notifications and various other things, but that's the meat and bones of the pipeline. And similarly, as we'd expect, we can trigger this pipeline off any change. So let's go quickly make a change, let that run, and I'll jump back to the pipeline and talk some more. So this is currently running a nano. So let's just quickly edit this in place. And let's try and make that a large. So we'll commit the change into a new branch. Again, imaginatively detailed pull request being made, and we'll create that pull request. Behind the scenes, we'll see that if I've lost my screen, that should be triggered in a second or two, hopefully, as a typical kind of Git process that you would expect, and then hit the execution. Now, what I was talking about there was the explicit execution that's being run. But behind the scenes, we also have some implicit controls, because we understand that your organization isn't just made up of people who can do everything. Different organizations parts of the organization will do different things. One of those would be our policy controls. And they kind of sit a little bit orthogonal to everything else that's going on. What we've set up here is an event type, or an entity type on the plan data. And what happens is every time a plan arrives in our system, we will run it through this policy. I was saying earlier about the OPA, which is, the plan is a well-known JSON structure. And so we can pass that through OPA. In this case, it's going to go through this checks and balances. Anyone who's familiar with those OPA will see you were checking for specific AMIs are being used. Again, great concern for some security. We can limit the actual instance sizes that are being used, and maybe some required tags, for example. So that's example of the policy. And then we then link that every time a Terraform plan event happens, this policy will be run. Now, if I jump back to here, hopefully we'll find that this has failed. I can go look at my pipeline, hopefully, and take a walk through. If I change back to the standard view, you can kind of see that this tight integration is kind of meant that we've initialized because we knew it was working within our cloud environment. So we've pulled down some cloud, we've spun up a cloud VM to run the environment in. We've also known by looking at the workspace, there's some code to be cloned, and then we can kind of get on, run the initialization, and then run on the plan. But there's been a bit of a problem. I guess if I jump back to the console view, we can have a bit of a look through just to kind of see what's being shown. And you'll see that anything that's kind of being printed out as you would standardly get on your CLI is returned in our logs. And similar on the plan side. And my credentials have expired. That's not what was supposed to happen. As I said, demo gods, I thought I'd cleared those already. Thankfully, I can show you one I ran earlier. This looks a bit better. The plan kind of continued. It saw that it wanted to move from a micro to a large. It went through the policy evaluation field and the pipeline field. I can also get a bit of a better view of that. In terms of policy evaluation, it's not a lot better, but it made quite clear that that the T2 large is not an allowed type. Anyone that was quick to notice the OPA will see that it was too big. We also offer, like today, rather than running through logs, I know some of us enjoy that, but as a high-level overview, you also get this kind of slightly nicer UI approach where we can kind of quickly scroll through and find that this was the change that was being made. Should this have passed, we would have jumped into some cost estimation. And if I jump across to another one, if it had passed, we could have gone with the GitOps approach of allowing that PR to be merged, and then on the merge, allow for an apply to happen, which is a separate pipeline, which ultimately includes an approval step, so a bit of a pause that could allow for some additional checks and balances, maybe some sign-off from management, or just a check similar to whenever you run Tofu apply. It'll say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And ultimately apply. And again, within this view, because the pipeline didn't fail early, we can kind of dig in then to the costing. That this price increase per month, which resulted in 84% change, and it was all coming from the fact that we moved from a nano to a micro, obviously being 100% change. So that's a bit of a whirlwind overview of the infrastructure as code management module that Harness is about to release, working with Tofu from the default. And that concludes that, Martin.
Thank you very much indeed. So again, thank you very much indeed. That's actually, it's very cool. It's not the first time I've seen it, but it is very exciting. We do have a few questions in the questions that I wanted to try and grab. I'm probably going to reword slightly, but maybe not. We can go with, and I think we've answered this already, but maybe it wasn't clear. So we have a question around when can we anticipate GA or production use of OpenTofu? My initial answer, and then you can correct me because you know more than me. My initial answer is OpenTofu itself is GA, and I think there are organizations using it. Our infrastructure as code module isn't quite GA yet.
Yes.
And I think
Sorry.
I'm wondering if that's where the confusion was. But now I'm going to verify that with you. That is the case, right?
Yes, that is the case. Apologies, that should be made clear. OpenTofu went GA at the start of the year with the 1.6 release. In terms of the competitors that are our competitors which are involved in this, like Spacelift, M0, Scalar, they've already migrated customers onto that who've wanted to move. So it's being used in production and in anger. Like, it is definitely GA. Infrastructure as code management, on the other hand, is still not quite like there yet. I think the technical term is that we're in public preview. And so we do have customers who are making use of, but GA is just built for slightly another little bit later in this year.
Sure, absolutely. So we have another question relating to OpenTofu with Terraform. I'm going to slightly interpret this, and I may be interpreting it wrong, but it's saying, are there any limitations or considerations to keep in mind when using OpenTofu? And then I would kind of put comma or OpenTofu with Terraform, i.e., can you use both? I think this is relating to when you were talking about being able to swap from one to the other.
Sure.
And I think but what are there any considerations to take into that as a consumer, rather than just less from the OpenTofu side, more from the consumer side?
Sure. We have a very detailed migration guide currently. So the 1.6 release, the absolute focus was that we could be a drop-in replacement for Terraform. And so the only thing that we would definitely call out is, as with migrating any system, is that everything is backed up. We as far as we can tell, and we've migrated people across, the demo you saw earlier actually initially was on Terraform, and I literally just changed the provider over, and everything just works seamlessly from 1.5.6. So from a consumer point of view, if you're wanting to migrate to Tofu, the first thing we would say is first get Terraform to 1.5.6, because that's the last version that we were forked from. And any compatibility issues then are the internal ones to Terraform. And then once moving, the move to 1.6 of Tofu should be seamless. However, we would obviously say, as with any migration, keep it back up, ensure you've got the state file somewhere else, and all the usual kind of caveats when you kind of migrate any of these systems.
And this is all documented on the OpenTofu site too as well, right?
Yes, it is. There's a migration guide that is there. There'll be further migration guides to follow at the minute, because 1.6 is a drop-in replacement. There should be no go do this, go do that. But I know in future releases that might not be the case. So we'll have more of if you're migrating from version 1.7 of Terraform to Tofu, are there any additional kind of issues that need to be taken into account? Are there things that Tofu doesn't support but Terraform does? Similarly, going back the other way, here are things that Terraform doesn't support but Tofu does, and those additional guides have been asked for by the community, so they're being worked on.
Awesome. So I'm gonna post up the next logical question, which is, how do I contribute to OpenTofu? Or how do I contribute to those guides? Or just how do I get involved?
Yeah, we're doing as much as humanly possible to be in the open. So github.com/OpenTofu is the organization. OpenTofu is the project, but we have a couple of different projects there. And go in if you want to get involved. We have a tag of good first issue. Jump in and get working away. As I said, we have a core team of engineers who are both writing code and also supporting the community effort. And they'll be able to kind of help out. We've definitely had people coming in with no Terraform experience or next to no Terraform experience, wanting as in terms of like contributing to Terraform and wanting to help out and being able to get up to speed pretty quickly. So that team are really good at trying to make sure that we get the most, because we want a big community around this. Like, it's how open source survives. So we're all in on that.
Awesome. I think there are a couple more questions, but they're a bit more in depth, and I think I'll probably take those offline. Or when I say I possibly mean Roger. But we'll take those offline and respond to. But I think just kind of in final wrap up from I guess from my side, I want to thank Roger for obviously taking the time to prep and show us, to talk about OpenTofu, to just what we're doing, with what we're seeing in the GitOps and that that infrastructure as code management. Overall, really appreciate the time and I know the effort to get everything ready for today. So thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate that. I also wanted to call out a couple of things that are on our tabs. We have a couple of future webinars and summits coming up. So we have a series that we're running actually, which is like a Utopia series, but it's starting with the Software Delivery Lifecycle Utopia, which is really on March the 14th, which is a webinar about kind of like all the what we think the perfect world would be like based on where we are now versus a lot of the challenges that people face across the software delivery lifecycle. The next one I'm actually super excited about, which is our DevOps Modernization Summit, which is on March the 26th. It's specifically about the role of AI in modern software development. There are some great speakers there from Spotify, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Harness, from Marriott, and from AWS. I think it will be an absolutely fabulous series of talks and well worth listening to. I would also say that actually me personally, but Harness as well will be at ArgoCon and KubeCon in Paris on March the 19th and then 20th to 22nd. All of this is in the links, but we really appreciate you listening today and spending the time to do so. And with that, I would also like to thank Techstrong very much indeed and hand back to Cody.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin, for keeping us on track and handling all these questions. And Roger, thank you so much for leading us through this demo. I think everything went really well today. So thank you both so much for the time and preparation that goes into joining us and delivering this to our audience. A couple of final reminders before we close things out. Our session today was recorded, and following this, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You'll also find it living on the DevOps website. That's devops.com/webinars. I will be reaching out to 2 of our attendees today to give you $50 Amazon gift cards. So thank you for your chats and your questions thus far. At this point, if you'd still like to become eligible, there is a link to our survey in the chat as well as in the handouts. So please give us your feedback there. We'd love to hear from you. I'd like to thank Harness for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone here, thank you so much for spending your time with us here at Techstrong Learning. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all.